دوستان عزیز شروع میکنیم. الان دوستان دیگه هم دارن میان و دیگه امیدوارم که هرچه زودتر جمعمون بزرگتر و جمعتر بشه. خیلی خوشحال من در بین دوستانی که الان اینجا میبینم فکر میکنم که همه فارسی زبان هستن. Should I speak English? I don't know if we may have someone there, but the presentation is in English, I know, so let me stay loyal to that, because we record these things and put them on our website, and then it becomes more usable by a broader audience, of course, with the speaker's permission. Of course, Iran is one of the very diversely populated in terms of ethnic groups, in terms of multilingual people, in terms of religious beliefs and belief systems. And it is sometimes a pity that in the mainstream Iranian studies, we don't necessarily always pay as much attention and learn about their work. One of these are Iranian Armenians, or the Iranian Hamvatan ethnic groups who are of Armenian origin. And I love the book that Ismail Rain wrote about them, although I'm sure there are many other books out there now, but what was really great about the book was that instead of saying Armenians in Iran, he actually referred to them as Iranian Armeni, the Iranians who are of Armenian origin. And that was, for his time, a big understanding, a good understanding of the situation. Now, many of us know about major, mega stars like Viggen and others, but we don't know that, for example, Iranian Armenians lost a number of people in the Iran-Iraq war. They suffered with us, with the rest of us, that their buildings in Iran, and I mean, I believe the number is so unknown to us, is estimated to be somewhere between 70 to 200,000. So I don't know. It's really one of those inaccuracies. But the range of historical, actually, buildings that Armenians have in Iran, and the modern architectural sites that are marvels of architecture. The fact that they actually brought to Iran the first press, the first book published in Iran, inside Iran, because Iran had printing organizations in India, but the first book printed in Iran was printed by Iranian Armenians. If you ever are interested and curious, as I hope you would be, just type in painting exhibits by Iranian Armenians. Just type in there and you'll see the range of artists who have worked there. Many of us, I hope, know about figures like Loris Cheknavarian, like Ervand Nahapetian or Yervand Nahapetian, and the painter and the musician. Of course, Cheknavarian is better known because he's a world known figure. So I also have to say this, one of the best high schools in Tehran was, and I believe still is, Madrasa Kushesh, which was established by the Armenians, and many non-Armenians would be trying to study in these schools. So with that in mind, I'm absolutely delighted that we have our colleague, Professor Claudia Yaghoobi, to hear more about Armenian poets, because as you know, language is one of those barriers. Unless you learn the language, you can admire it from a distance. So it's a great opportunity for us to listen to that. But before that, I'm going to ask my colleague invite her, Marjan Mousavi, Dr. Mousavi, to give a biography of Dr. Yaghoobi. I'm sure you have to shorten it for the purpose today, but you know, with the significant aspects of that for our guests today.
Sure, thank you. Dr. Claudia Yaghoobi is a Roshan Institute Associate Professor and Director of Persian Studies at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. She received her PhD in Comparative Literature from the University of California at Santa Barbara in 2013. As an Iranian Armenian American, Yaghoobi's research concerns the literature of the Middle East with a special focus on Persian and Armenian literature. Within Persian literature and culture, her focus is on the members of sexual, ethnic, and religious minority populations, ones marginalized by normative society. Her work addresses the embodiments of liminality through which authors, artists, directors challenge and critique social hegemonies. Her first monograph, Subjectivity in Attar, Persian Sufism and European Mysticism, published by Purdue University Press, reassesses the significance of the concept of transgression and construction of subjectivity within selected works of the medieval Persian Sufi poet Farid ad-Din Attar-Neyshaburi. Her second monograph, Temporary Marriage in Iran, Gender and Body Politics in Modern Persian Literature and Film, published by Cambridge University Press, examines Sighe, temporary marriage, a rather controversial social institution, and its representation in modern Iranian cultural productions. Her third monograph, titled Transnational Culture in the Iranian Armenian Diaspora, under contract with Edinburgh University Press, examines the various creative ways that Iranian Armenian authors and artists, as members of religious and cultural minoritized populations of Iran, and later in the diaspora in the US, craft and negotiate a unique notion of self, which is at odds with the wish to be integrated into mainstream society while maintaining ties with the homeland. Dr. Yaghoobi has also recently been named Director of the Middle East and Islamic Studies Center at UNC. I can go on and on, but just in the interest of time, I'll stop here. I know that you have recently also edited a new collection on Me Too Iran, which is a pioneering work in this topic. Thank you so much, Dr. Yaghoobi, in accepting our invitation. Welcome, and the virtual floors is yours.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Before we start, Claudia John, I would like to see if we know why there is an interruption in sound. Did everyone have interruption in sound? If no, okay, then we're fine. Sorry to interrupt. Then please go ahead, Claudia John.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Marjan John, and thank you so much, Fatima John, for inviting me today and for the kind introduction. I just wanted to say, Fatima John, I went to Kushesh, actually, in Iran.
Oh, wow. How wonderful. Okay.
In terms of, what you were talking about, Aramane Iran or Iranian Armenians, Irani-Haya Armeni, Armenians themselves call themselves Iranahai, which is exactly Iranian Armenian. But in my research, I tried to alternate them to show the fluidity of identity.
Wonderful.
Okay, so let me just share with you. All right, so this is, I wanted to start with a painting by myself. I'm not a professional painter. I do painting as a hobby and as a great outlet for, when I'm stressed. But this painting was when I was thinking about transnationality, and this is how it turned out. And the pieces of paper you see on it include, language from Armenian, Persian, and English. And then I cut the pieces, and then I burnt them with, fire match around the pieces of the paper. And this is 36 by 48, the painting, the canvas. So I put it down on the floor and I stood over it and just, let the papers fall wherever they fell. I glued them there. And it's interesting, in the red circle in the middle, you can see the 3 languages collided.
Yes.
Which was very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so then I'll begin with the painting that we see on the flyer of this talk, which is Garnik Der Hakopian's painting. Garnik Der Hakopian is a contemporary Iranian Armenian artist. I was in contact with him to receive copyrights permission for some of his works. I chose this image because of the title, and also because the image itself represents the title Changeable Views, which shows multiple perspectives, how if we change our perspective, going with my argument today about new tribalism with Gloria and Zaldua, and becoming more global and changing our perspective to multiplicity, works through art as well. But I'll tell you a little bit about Garnik's work. However, in terms of from I'm using the words of art historian Ruin Pakbaz, and this is a quote from Ruin Pakbaz. Garnik Der Hakopian uses different sources such as Western modern art and Persian traditional arts and the Armenian cultural heritage. Specifically, Cubism's geometrical methods of spatial organization and expressionistic exaggeration of colors and shapes, and also Persian motifs and Armenian ornaments, end quote. So as part of, minoritized population in Iran, I suggest that Der Hakopian's works embody what cultural theorist Gloria Anzaldúa considers, and I'm quoting, the locus of resistance, of rupture, implosion, and explosion, and of putting together the fragments and creating a new assemblage, end quote. So putting together, as you can see, putting together the assemblage, the fragments, there is a new assemblage which represents multiplicity. Now, moving forward the talk for today. Iranian Armenians are by definition part of the Armenian diaspora, which is usually applied to all Armenian communities outside of the Republic of Armenia and the territory of Nagorno-Karabakh. Iranian Armenians rarely, however, use the term diaspora to define themselves, but are simultaneously aware that they fall under the jurisdiction of Armenia's diaspora ministry. According to James Barry in his book, Armenian Christians in Iran, quote, Iranian Armenians are neither entirely a stateless diaspora, lacking a homeland that is an established nation state, nor a state-linked diaspora, but are both at once to varying degrees, end quote. However, in Iran, Armenians are regularly considered as foreigners, even though they hold Iranian citizenship. Most Armenians in Iran claim to be the descendants of the 17th century Shah Abbas deportations, hence they feel enforced exile. Most see Armenia as their ancestral homeland and even maintain a myth of return, while a number also maintain a nationalistic sense of anger at being deported to Iran. This is the context in which I use the term diaspora today. Diasporic individuals inherently navigate dual challenge, the everyday implications of their kaleidoscopic identity in a new environment and a task of piecing together an identity rooted in fragmented home and host nation. As they attempt to restore both challenges, their cultural identity takes root. Cultural theorist Stuart Hall defines cultural identity as a focus on one's shared culture and the vectors of multiple cultures. Because diasporic individuals experience multiple consciousness, the establishment of a cultural identity is often full of challenges, including the suffering arising from fragmented memories, the weight of solitude, and a constant roaming between borders of two or more worlds. The new and old environments coexist, placing life in diaspora in what Edward Said calls, quote, outside of habitual order, in a nomadic, decentered, contrapuntal sphere, end quote. Focusing on the idea of dignity inherent in multiplicities rather than on attempts to belong, political philosopher Frantz Fanon describes how diasporic multiplicities often contradict one another as a quote-unquote way of being. To become is a never-ending journey. In this talk, I will briefly revisit experiences of diasporic Iranian Armenian poets to maintain cultural heritage through their references to the homeland of Armenia. Then I'll illustrate how transnationalism manifests itself in poetry. This is achieved by investigating how Iranian Armenian poets are presented as diasporic transnational people who are culturally anchored in the host nation, yet simultaneously maintaining symbolic and spiritual ties with their homeland. Depending on where in the world they are, this homeland can be both Armenia and Iran. In this context, I propose that Iranian Armenian poets can potentially reframe their diasporic transnational story, one that Anzaldúa calls a new tribalism. That is, they have the opportunity to make a conscious choice where, quote, their resistance to identity boxes leads them to a different tribe, a different story, enabling them to rethink themselves in a more global spiritual terms. In this narrative, national boundaries dividing us from the others, in Spanish, nos from otros, are porous, and the cracks between the worlds serve as gateways. And the key word here is gateways, end quote. This new tribalism is the essence of transnationalism and multiple consciousness. Iranian Armenian poets successfully articulate themes of loss, trauma, and nostalgia, effectively manipulating the setting and background of each work to elucidate the diasporic experience, the tensions between assimilation and maintenance of a cultural heritage, and the ways that a legacy of multiple forced and voluntary relocations and a genocide have fragmented identity. Their existence is confusing and enclosing, while it is plural and ambiguous. Uprooted and relocated, they have had to reconfigure their existence since there is no option of a return to home. Living in between in a state of uncertainty quickens the poet's desire to hold on to history, roots, and memory, longing nostalgically for a geographical place that is no longer the place they left or imagined. In this process, finding themselves in a new homeland, or rather the host land, they reshape their identity and re-articulate their self, negotiating it on several levels. The negotiation between diaspora and home occurs every day, which illustrates the flexibility of their existence. Accustomed as they are to such fluidity, their mere existence within majority culture unsettles mainstream society. Now I would like to read two poems where we can see direct references to the homeland of Armenia. As one of the turning points in contemporary Iranian Armenian history, Nergacht, or the period of repatriation, makes an appearance in many poems. After World War II, the Soviet Union and Iran agreed to relocate Iranian Armenians back to Armenia via an organized migration with a plan to register Iranian Armenians, move them to Tehran, and then to relocate them to Armenia. However, this agreement was halted. But throughout the 20th century Pahlavi era, the Armenian population in Iran increased, and it flourished tremendously in Tehran because of this, particularly during 1950s. This is called Nergacht. Now, during the mid-century, many Armenian villagers who wished to return to Soviet Armenia were instead forced to, reside and settle in Tehran. This Nergacht makes an appearance in many poems, including this one by Armen Ges, which is called Hayrenadart, or translated as Repatriate. And to touch the homeland, the man created the invisible sensitive fingers and penetrating slender wings which search for the stars. The human eyes already see the old homeland. And sometimes reaches the ears the distant call of the old brothers. Soon, very soon, the man sitting on the wings of light will return to the homeland. Guest creates imaginative and invisible wings and fingers so that the diasporic individual can reach the homeland. He makes references to the old homeland and how it no longer exists the way that the diasporic individual remembers it. However, his persona still has hopes for a return. So there is a direct reference by using Nergacht as the title. And even though homeland in the first line, even in its Armenian text, does not reference to Armenia, from the Nergacht, we know that this is a reference to Armenia. The painting you see on the right, is it right? On the left is Marco Grigoryan's Desert. This sense of longing is also expressed in Nerses Mesropian's book, Garota Hayi, or Armenian Longing, and it more emphatically makes an appearance in the collection's namesake poem. So the poem itself is also called Garota Hayi, or Armenian Longing. Among the people of the world and their nation's vocabulary, you won't find so many extreme longing and an overflow of yearning. No one feels longing like an Armenian. No one lives longing like an Armenian, and does not yearn and does not suffer deep personal longing. An Armenian's longing, how abysmal it is, infinitely deep, vast and inaccessible, like its Mount Masis, as vast as its Mount Masis. The layered meanings built into this poem incorporate language, time, place, and history. Mesropian's position as an Iranian Armenian from Jura, New Jolfa, who's also in the US, traveled, then later migrated to the US, writing primarily in his mother tongue of Armenian, highlights the rich vocabulary and cultural depth in the Armenian diaspora's desire to maintain their cultural heritage. Yet, like Mesropian's text, this cultural maintenance comes at the price of longing for an elusive homeland. He points out that the homecoming for an Armenian is inaccessible, just like Armenia's most famous landmark, Mount Masis, which is vast and unattainable. Now, I want to turn to two poems where the references to the homeland are a bit ambiguous, but in its Armenian, there is a hint to understand that this is still, referencing Armenia. Oh, the painting is by Der Hakopian. It's titled Immigration, and it's amazing. There are so many different elements there that can be understood globally and transnationally, but there are also elements such as, some pieces of Khachkar, which is, found in Armenian art and architecture that can also reference to Armenian culture. So Hrant Falian's Apashavang, or Apology, presents the tensions of wishing to return to the homeland in devotion, yet feeling guilty because of the inability to reach Armenia. Falian asks for forgiveness here. He says, homeland, homeland, forgive. In the Armenian text, when he says he writes homeland, 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 the word he uses is Hayrenik. Hayrenik in Armenian language is the exact reference to fatherland of Armenia. Homeland, homeland, forgive the bad behavior of your child, so tender, so loving, and yet he did not give you that which he had to give you. He did not give the supreme, which he does not have, which did not exist. And he could not give, for he who has the greatest worship and devotion, what are his lavish oaths for, when he does not give to his beloved that which does not exist, and he cannot give. The seemingly insurmountable distance between diasporic Armenians and the homeland has prompted other poets also to compose praises to the Armenian homeland. For example, we have this also in Markar Qarabegyan's poem, which I will move to in a minute. But this painting we have on the side, again from Marco Grigorian, is called Abgush Dizi, which is, a very culturally cultural representation of, Iran. In Iran, Abgush, Barbari, the saucer, tea, and sugar. Markar Qarabegyan's poem, Ko yerki naman voch mi yerk chaka, there is no song like yours, illustrates the interplay between tribute and longing. How far I am, my precious homeland, from you now, and how long have I not heard your songs, I have not heard you, and how many songs have I heard from the distance? As far as I can remember, your songs are wonderful, heartfelt. Now again, Qarabegyan also, when he refers to homeland, he uses the word Hayrenik. So another reference to very ambiguously, probably not for Armenians, but if read in the English translation and in a global context. Themes of isolation and a deep longing to return to the homeland are basically central to the works of Iranian Armenian poets. The painting we see here is by Marco Grigorian also. This is part of his Holocaust series, which is a reference to, human suffering and plight. Now I want to move forward to the more transnational poems. I will read 5 poems where there are specific identification marks as to what homeland we are referring to. I'm reading poems by Alishan, Mesropian, Balasanyan, and Vahe Armen. Alishan, Mesropian, and Balasanyan's poems are interpreted as references to both Iran and Armenia, as they are, they have references to both, and then they all are settled in the US. Vahe Armen, who lives in Iran, writes about homeland in a very global and transnational way. Armen writes in Persian, while Alishan writes in English, and Mesropian and Balasanyan write in Armenian, which I think in terms of language is very significant to know. In his book, Dancing Barefoot on Broken Glass, Leonardo Alishan, an Iranian Armenian poet and immigrant to the US, delineates his literal and metaphorical understanding of diaspora through cultural etymology. Paradis, Persian garden, garden of roses, roses in rows upon rows, rushing red within a rectangular crossing of rivers, perfumed Persian rug upon which no one shall walk with shoes. Paradis, paradise, paradise, forested mountains, mount of meeting, womb from which the arms of God the giant and God the child, the watery arms, the Euphrates and the Tigris emerge, where the Armen rested, weary of wandering. Paradise, Armenia, Armenia, garden of glory, where the Armen planted the tree of life, where they fell on their knees, heavy with anticipation for the fruit. The Antichrist Armilus ate the fruit. This god of miscarriage also ate many children of the Armen. Armenia, mother, mother Armenia, garden with dead gardener, begotten of woman with bleeding womb, begotten but with broken bones, tree also broken. Garden begotten of woman, but also woman begotten but forsaken, fed but by rivers of red blood, flesh flowered with wounds of red roses, face covered with filthy footprints, forsaken but not forgetful. Armenia, wandering child, Armenia, exiled citizen of Paradis, face moist with memories of perfumed red roses, faded but fair. A flower on a rectangular Persian rug, not a rushing river, but a row of waves. Returning to the womb, Paradis, Armenia, paradise. Alishan begins his cultural etymology with Paradis, the Persian word for heaven or paradise, and also the Armenian word Pardes, which also means garden, locating the roots of diaspora in Persian gardens. Paradis is also reminiscent of Persepolis, which was built as an earthly emanation of paradise. In the Quran, heaven is often referred to by Arabized Persian word Ferdos or Jannat al-Ferdos, Jannatul Ferdos, which is also the origin of the famous Persian poet's name, Abul Qasim Ferdowsi. In addition, he references Persian roses and Persian rugs, for which Persia is well known, and that often represents the idea of garden and paradise too, paradise. In moving toward Armenia, Alishan writes of features and characteristics unique to Armenian history, geography, and mythology by referencing the forested mountains, the Euphrates and the Tigris, and the Armen, the first Armenians who are believed to have settled in the area. For instance, the tree of life is a pre-Christian symbol still found in Armenian churches. Mother Armenia refers to mother language, that is Mayreni Lezu, in contrast to fatherland. As I mentioned in the previous poems, we had, for example, Hayrenik, the fatherland. So we don't have the fatherland here. We have the mother Mayreni Lezu, or mother Armenia, mother language. He also refers to the medieval figure Armilus, an anti-Messiah figure in Jewish eschatology, parallel to the Christian Antichrist, who will conquer the earth and persecute believers. Immediately after this, he writes about Armenia, the motherland, as begotten of woman with bleeding womb and bloody rivers. Juxtaposing these two sections, the reader understands that Armilus could be a reference to the Ottoman Empire and what happened there. It can also be, the bloody rivers can also be an allusion to the Book of Revelation, as well as to Avetik Isahakyan's poem, Ejan Hayrenik, which is another, oh my fatherland, my dear fatherland. Alishan's references to both the mother and wandering child evoke an important psychic experience for diasporic Armenians, namely the desire for safety and nurturing linked to their global dispersion. His final definition integrates both Armenian and Persian features within the liminality of diaspora, pointing to a multi-layered hybrid existence and identity. Significantly, Alishan ultimately proclaims Armenia as a womb to which the speaker anticipates returning. For Alishan's speaker, movement away from past trauma depends on the integration of cultural hybridity, history, geography, and temporal consciousness. By engaging the etymology of the Persian Pardis in English language, he employs the new tools of the new host nation to explore Armenian and Persian ancestral legacies. To integrate into US culture, Alishan's etymologies establish a trajectory of identifying the homeland, dismantling it in his psyche, and establishing new meanings for their reintegration. The speaker must first empty their soul so that the new culture can penetrate and settle. Yet this strategy proves unsuccessful as the past continues to haunt them, inciting a self-reinvention that melds the past, present, and future. These processes of disintegration and reintegration are not mutually exclusive. Living between multiple cultures leads Alishan to multiple perspectives. Seeing from multiple vantage points simultaneously makes these cultures transparent. Distancing himself from his roots and ancestry, he is able to view the world around him from a new perspective and not the one that he had been acculturated to. This in-between space that he occupies debunks the myth of monoculturalism and the superiority of one culture over another. As we can see, he melds all these three cultures very well together. I mean, I love the line where he refers to Armenia as a flower on a rectangular Persian rock that is part of the Persia, part of the paradise. Alishan needs to reconnect his identity anew, and reconstruct his identity anew, an identity that is in constant motion and growth. Now, for Alishan, the impact of this diaspora and exile is so intense that he revisits these subjects several times in his books. In his collection, Free Fall, a collected short stories, he also writes about exile again in a story titled The Exile. I'm sure you can well imagine the perplexed expression on the faces of airport officials as they look at an embarrassed man pulling at his loose tie and inhaling deeply, while they try to reconcile his faceless features with his passport photograph. Now, this one is a moment in the US. In using a mundane object for many diaspora individuals, a passport, Alishan invokes the migrations of diaspora people from one place to another. In diasporic literature, passports are standard motifs as identity documents that associate the individual with a specific nation. However, the passport photograph and the emotions it embodies may contradict the individual's sense of belonging and citizenship to a particular nation. According to scholar of diaspora studies, Lily Cho, and I'm quoting, "The acceptable facial expressions reveal no emotion. They are natural only insofar as they are completely emotionally neutral. That is, they are not natural at all. They expose a citizen subject cut and composed for identification purposes. This subject is neither angry, happy, sad, disgusted, nor even particularly present. The foreclosure of emotion in a passport photograph The identity document that ties a person to a nation illuminates a contradiction between feeling and citizenship. On the one hand, as these instructions for the passport photograph suggest, emotion obscures the identity of the citizen. On the other, emotion, or the capacity for it, is very much a part of the conception of the modern citizen, end quote. Simultaneously, the passport photo provokes anxiety. Alishan's photo is different from his current appearance, which perplexes the officers. The disconnection between passport photo and his current appearance is also a common experience among many diasporic individuals. In this fraught moment in the airport, while Alishan is faced with the patrol officer, it is doubtful that his anxiety-ridden facial expressions would be as natural or neutral as his passport photograph. This is a moment that can also be read as the experience of being racialized. The Iranian Armenian Alishan, passing as white, presents a passport that documents his Iranian/Middle Eastern roots. And while legally considered as white in the US, he is socially deemed as to be non-white. The scrutiny he endures is reminiscent of the racialization of Middle Eastern brown bodies when assumed to be foreign-born and terrorist. Whether or not Alishan is an American citizen or legally classified as white is irrelevant. He can never fully claim an American sociocultural identity. Regardless, the same person and photograph that delineate this otherness are the symbols of his hybrid identity. They are evidence of his diasporic existence. Although it may also function as a tool of state surveillance, and although it accompanies him in his mobility and movement through the liminal space between nations, a passport implies and anticipates the borders of other nation states, but also illustrates the limits of globalization. Now, the image we have here is by Arapik Baghdasaryan, a graphic artist. And again, this is a very global transnational work, a reference to, global consumerism, capitalism, and, the socioeconomic plight of the working class. In his poem, Sarzamine Man, My Homeland, Wahe Armen uses passport as a metaphor to portray the liminal status of a diaspora person and their devotion to an eventual homecoming too. So I read this one in Persian just to give you the melody also. پاهایم فرو رفته است در خاک، دستایم اما تن زمین را در آغوش دارد. سرزمین من گذرنامه‌ای به وسعت یک سرگردانی نیست. سرزمین من آنقدر بزرگ است که میپندارم سایه است از او هنگام عبور از کنار خورشید و آنقدر کوچک که روزی آن را بر بالهای یک پروانه دیدم. And this is my translation, just forgive me. I'm not a good translator. My feet are stuck in the dirt. My hands, though, are embracing the body of the earth. My homeland is not a passport as vast as quandary. My homeland is so vast that I suppose it's a shadow of it when I pass by the sun, and so small that one day I saw it on the wings of a butterfly. Beginning with an image of immobility, Armen emphasizes that only his feet are stuck while his hands embrace the earth and the potential for the future. Although he is suffused with possibility, it comes at the price of a monumental sense of uncertainty, a confinement in the shadow of liminality. It is as if the speaker is waiting to be given permission to exist, to have an identity based in an imagined homeland. These tensions are magnified by the image of the passport, a symbol that highlights multiple nations and multiple national identities. It also highlights the strain of resisting assimilation while maintaining cultural and political connections to a homeland. Passports typically indicate a specific nation, geography, nationality, and belonging. But when Armen implies that his passport is not his homeland, he revives the possibility of belonging that transcends borders across geography. While Armen's passport enables him to cross collapsing borders, Alishan's passport intensifies his otherness, liminality, and non-whiteness within his host nation. And while Alishan and Armen are using passports as signs of physical flights to travel to the homeland, Mesropian's yearning for homecoming is expressed through a metaphorical flight back home. This is demonstrated in this poem titled Terchei Mtgovtun, If Only I Could Mentally Fly Home. Ach liner yeրջանիկ պայծառ օր թռչեի մտքովտուն, ուր արդեն մարել է ու լուր է ամեն բան եւ անկյուն, ուր այլևս չի ապրում ոչ մի շունչ շնչավոր, ուր չկա արևից մի կտոր անցյալից հիշատակ, թռչեի մտքովտուն, փնտրեի մանկություն, տենչալի մարդկություն, ախ թե որ ես մի օր Get մտքով, թռչեի, հասնեի, տեսնեի. Oh, if there was a bright and happy day, if only I could mentally fly home, where it's already night and everything is silent in every corner, where no one no longer lives, living beings, there is no ray of sun, a reminder of the past. If only I could mentally fly home, seeking my childhood, craving humanity. Oh, if one day I could at least fly mentally, if I could arrive, if I could see. Many Iranian Armenian poets use a textual or visual limbo that intensifies temporality, sometimes collapsing past and future, and at other times defying the temporal logic of memory. Mesropian's use of a bright yet fading past opens up this kind of limbo. The speaker's attempts to imagine flying into the waiting homeland as themselves woven from memories and reminders. Although the poet stays firmly planted in the host nation, his motivations of returning include seeking my childhood and craving humanity. Experiences embodied by his own past that suggest an inability to relate to diaspora. One of the most significant principles and primal drives of humanity is a biological and cultural need for connection, trust within relationships, certainty, and belonging. Rather than seeking these elements in diaspora, Mesropian turns to his memories to find them. When circumstances make it impossible for the Iranian Armenian diasporic community to return to the homeland, nostalgia and identity are projected onto a place that is physically non-existent, yet that endures in the imagination. Once the idyllic homecoming is deemed impossible, it is replaced by a return to memories and mental flight. The surrender to the multiple perspectives surfaces in Iranian Armenian poet Sonia Balasanyan's Երկու գիրք բանաստեղծություն, or the 2 books of poems, where writing about wars, calamities, and genocide, Iranian Armenians continue to demand recognition for the loss of their lands. We are standing invincibly, missiles around, with sweaty foreheads and our fists hardened, squeezing a bunch of flowers. Our view is clear, our words short. We do not have a sinister laughter, but a simple demand. With the ashes of the martyrs' bodies, we have anointed our souls. We stand straight, look into your eyes, we demand ownership, land. Balasanyan wrote this poem on April 15, 1986, an important date for understanding the poem's context. We can interpret that this is a poem about the demand for lost homeland of Armenia and the Armenian genocide, since it's written in the month of April. On the other hand, the year of the poem, 1986, falls during the Iran-Iraq War, which can also speak to lost Iranian lands and souls to the atrocities of the war. It can also speak to any atrocities of wars and lost homelands and souls. So the fluidity within this poem through which the reader can form multiple interpretations speaks to that Balasanyan's transnationality. The image on the left is actually by Balasanyan's sister, Sato A, who lives in Glendale, California, and is a very great poet also. And she recently started painting, and this is an Armenian woman. She sent me the picture. These poems show that the same poet that longs for the homeland of Armenia can have equal longings for the homeland of Iran, or may even generally long for a global sense of belonging. I would like to suggest that these poets therefore try to find home and a sense of belonging in their writing and in their works. In Refuge, a poem from Dancing Barefoot on Broken Glass, Alishan discusses this quest of identity, fragmentation of the self, and how writing poetry is his refuge in diaspora. I need structure, I need form. When the poet is a mad Armenian priest, when the poet is a drunk Iranian cleric, I need clean English, I need Alexander Pope. Alishan is aware of his fragmented memory, existence, and writing. He seeks structure. However, he seeks a structure that imitates his multiple consciousness. The physical act of writing provides him with an outlet and mechanism to establish memory, history, and legacy against forgetfulness, while also allowing him to rewrite his history. All his life, he struggles to control his situation, connecting with his homeland and understanding his fragmented identity. Yet the one constant in his life is writing. The image that I have here is a sculpture. This is a very large sculpture. They're larger than life figures from Lilith Therian's works, which is called Three Figures. We observe this in Azad Matian's work, where he too finds home in writing. Writing gives him the power to fight for belonging, the right to remember, while also fighting to be remembered. He writes, I don't have an address. I've been deported from 7 ports. I carry my home like a turtle. No, I carry my home like a poem within me, and I frequently lose my way. In Matian's poem, the image of the turtle with its house on its back is symbolic, describing the displacement and constant mobility of a diasporic person. This image of the turtle and home also appears in Gloria and Zaldua's work. To combat the lack of belonging and isolation, those poets turn to writing to immortalize their experience of loss. Language and writing have permanence. They cement the poet's thoughts within history, expressing individual voices and opinions. At first glance, these poems seem to propose a diametrical relationship between past and present, hostland and homeland. However, they actually propose a cyclical relationship that revisits movement between host and homeland, and between trauma, hope, survival, and struggle. The host country and the homeland are held in the equal regard in the transition between the 2 points. The journey from homeland to host nation entails the trauma and the turmoil of diasporic displacement and the struggle to find safety and a sense of belonging. The journey from host nation back to homeland is often a mental exercise where the homeland may be inaccessible. In his imaginary homeland, novelist and essayist Salman Rushdie states that even if the origin country still exists, return is impossible because of its transformation over time. He envisions an inevitable and natural distance between the origin of a memory and the local changes that accumulate over time. Attempting to return to the point of origin becomes impossible since even the physical or geographical point shifts and changes, which suggests that loss of the past is inherent to human experience. Because the world changes, it is often impossible to revisit important diasporic points of origin in the material world, but they are accessible in the imagination and minds of these poets. The physical journey from homeland to host nation contradicts directly with the metaphorical journey from host to homeland, as the homeland is based in an idealized memories that can never be actualized. Forced transition for diasporic individuals starkly opposes the coveted pilgrimage back to homeland. The 4 points on the circle unify the homeland, the journey, the host nation, and the imagination as a means of return. The diasporic cycle entails leaving the origin country, encountering the traumas of migration, experiencing disillusionment within the host nation, and eventually arriving at a romanticized relationship with an ideal rendition of the homeland. Because this imaginary homeland does not exist, the cycle continues and creates an endless, persistent longing in the diasporic person for a homeland. The cyclical nature of this movement offers little resolution and must be disrupted to reconcile or alleviate the traumas characteristic of its subject. Edward Said posits that when not addressed, the diaspora further propagates new diasporas, eventually causing isolationism and nationalism. For Iranian Armenian diasporic poets, what they have been told about life through tenets of their home culture is transitional, and their lived experiences are personal. Hence, they need to break out of their monocultural way of viewing the world, not only to free themselves from this mental and emotional prison, but also to challenge official hegemonic narratives about nationalism. When they travel, their perspectives on culture, home, and motherland changes with their mobility. Home travels with them, and culture remains ingrained within them. But at the same time, they adopt elements of the new culture in the host nation. In fact, they co-create their cultural identity as a hybrid transnational individual. Diasporic Iranian Armenian poets reinterpret the concept of home in the transformative space of writing. Breaking away from this cyclical movement between home and host nation, in hopes of disrupting nationalism, transnational poets embrace the host nation while maintaining spiritual ties with the homeland. With an emphasis on their feeling of Armenianness or Iranianness, transnational Iranian Armenian poets are truly part of a diasporic transnational community. This diasporic transnationalism, in turn, provides insight into their struggle with multiple consciousness, multiple identity, and multiple forms of existence. While boundaries are constantly being established, reinforced, and modified, they also want to free themselves from one culture, one community, and one nation. In this sense, the self and the other exist in the same space. In literary critique, Trin Minha's words, quote, "It is always over here between us, within our discourse, that the other becomes a nameable reality. Thus, despite all the conscious attempts to purify and exclude, cultures are far from being unitary, as they have always owed their existence more to differences, hybridities, and alien elements than they really care to acknowledge," end quote. This kind of acknowledgement challenges earlier understandings of diaspora, immigration, and assimilation. It subverts hegemonic identity formations by insinuating the marginalized other into the fabric of the dominant. This rearticulation decolonizes hegemonic notions that we have one unified national identity. And this stabilizes the power relations between the ethnic and the native. Through their transnational boundary blurring, these poets become what, in geographer Michael Smith's words, not only transnational, but also translocal, that is, quote, situated yet mobile subjectivities, end quote, both here and there. So the image I have here is clear. Yeprem Khan, an Armenian, revolutionary officer during the constitutional revolution of Iran. And this is another statue by Lilith Derian, which is installed in Surp Astvazatin Church, or the Holy Mary Church in Tehran. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for a fascinating presentation. So many of us identify with what you said and discussed through poetry and art, and generally human feeling that I think goes beyond the experiences of the Armenians. So that you talked about. So that's wonderful. I have things that I'm really excited to ask, but I don't want to take time off from others. So I'm just saying we have asked people to put their questions in the chat. Please send them to Marjan or myself. So I'm not seeing questions yet. So let me go ahead and ask at least one of my questions. And I think you started with the idea of new globalism, this new tribalism. And I think this is a very exciting idea, as the opposite to it is closing in and becoming more nationalistic. And unfortunately, there are lots of discouragement towards this kind of opening up and globalization. So I wondered if you might say a little bit about the way you might bring this to your classroom or your writing or your art, in whichever way, whichever media you prefer. As I think most of us should really take that seriously and start bringing it, addressing it more effectively as we deal with our young students in classroom.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, the book itself, I wrote a prologue for the book because I consider myself also struggling with all these, different parts of identity sometimes, because sometimes you're so anchored in Iran, and then something happens in Armenia, and then you're, involved with Armenia, and then there's things going on in the US. So what are you supposed to do, and how are you supposed to negotiate all these aspects? Which is exactly how we as teachers do our syllabi. When we start designing our syllabi, there are so many aspects that we need to consider and negotiate and maneuver, bringing everything together. So in terms of teaching and in terms of designing the syllabi, I pay very close attention to, all different forms of minoritized populations. Let's say I bring in gender, sexuality, ethnicity, race, everything, class specifically. We don't get to talk much about, class and social status. I try to include all of those. A couple of years ago, I wasn't as conscious of designing syllabi in this way. And I was teaching a Middle Eastern women's writing class. And I did notice that many of the works that I'm assigning are particularly from Iran, but I'm calling it Middle Eastern. So then and also, for example, we have Muslim women or Muslim communities in Indonesia, in China. So I started bringing in those also. So I have tried to be very careful about those in terms of teaching. And then in terms of accessibility, I did, training at UNC about equity. So my classes now are considered equitable, courses in terms of making the course accessible to all students with different diverse skill sets. And in terms of research, let me give you an example of this very, recent volume that I'm editing. I try to include everyone from, queer community, our authors, different genders, different scholars at different stages of their scholarship. We have some senior scholars, some, PhD students who are at the beginning of their path. And then we have activists also from within Iran and from the diaspora from all over the world. So I have been very careful choosing everyone for different chapters to include and be inclusive rather than exclusive.
Yeah, I mean, if I may just very quickly follow up, that's fantastic. And of course, it's very, very desirable. I'm wondering when we should actually bring this discourse to the forefront of the conversation, to actually address this very highly desired tribalism. That means we include others, but actually at the forefront. But, it is something that has to be happening on multiple levels, but by different people in different disciplines. I see that you have questions. Marjan, do you want to bring up the
Yes. The first question, what do you think about the Armenians and Armenian identity in the works of non-Armenian writers such as Kurt Vonnegut's Bluebird?
Thank you, Mehdi. I haven't read that work, actually. I should read it. But in many of the Iranian works, it's been argued before too, and we all know, even in cinema, they are very much so stereotyped. And one of the works that I use in my, research in my book, for example, is from Arbi Ovanesyan. And his book, his film Cheshme, I use Cheshme, and we have Arman in Cheshme, who was an Armenian actor, but he speaks fluent Persian. There is no accent, which is for me kind of Ovanesyan breaking that stereotypical mold and deconstructing that kind of representation of Armenians in Iranian films. But I haven't read this work. I hope it's not stereotypical.
If I may speak, it is not. Yeah, and I think Vonnegut is very sympathetic to the Armenian cause. And in another of his works, he talks about the genocide, Armenian genocide. And here you have an abstract painter named Kabo Kevorkian or something like that. Yeah. And he saw his life over there.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of works about the Armenian genocide. One of the things that the reviews that came back from Edinburgh for my manuscript was the one thing that they mentioned was that we don't have many works on Iranian Armenians. We have so many works about Western Armenia and the genocide, but not in the Eastern Armenia, which is, you know, I do have a subsection of one of my chapters where I talk about the genocide, because it does come up in the poetry and in the works of these Armenians, even though Iranian Armenians were not directly impacted or involved, but still it comes up as the collective consciousness. But it's just a subsection in a chapter. But we do have a lot of works about the genocide, you're right.
And we have another question. Shall we ask Ahmed to ask the question himself rather than me?
Sure. Well, we were told to write it, so I wrote it down, but thanks a lot for a wonderful talk, which I enjoyed a lot. I just wanted to see if you could say a few words on how Iranian Armenian poets writing in Armenian, Persian, or English, as you quoted from their work to us, relate to other Armenians, say Armenian Turkish, Armenian Arab, Armenian, you know, other hyphenated Armenians writing in also multiple languages. What is there, you know, we do refer to a transnational diasporic community, but it also obviously has its cracks and fissures and limitations of access and such. So I just was curious, in your experience, how does that come across?
Yeah, thank you so much. That is exactly true. And you're right, you know, even globalization, transnationalism has its own limits, and we see it through language. Language is a very important, you know, tool for means or, you know, medium for that. And the yeah, all these works that I'm working with, many of them are written either in Persian or in Armenian. The majority in Armenian, the majority have been published by Armenian publishing houses. So the larger community, even in Iran, let's say, not even globally, you know, the Iranians don't have access to these poems or these works. So it's very important, I think, but I don't think that if they don't know the language, let's say Arabic or Turkish, they do have access to them. Yeah. And I did want to tell you, I just forgot that an anecdote about myself dealing with these languages, but I will remember and tell you later.
No,
yeah.
Please go ahead.
I wanted to say, even in Armenian, you know, we have the two dialects, right? The Western and the Eastern dialect. And before coming to America, I had never myself been exposed to the Western dialect. And it's interesting that in Glendale, my hairdresser is from Beirut. And he would start speaking Armenian to me, and I had no clue what he was saying. So I would ask him to speak in English, because my ears, like, I wasn't used to the sound of it. Gradually, you start learning. But then on the other hand, I remember we used to watch all the Turkish soap operas on, you know, internet or on satellite TV in Iran, and we had learned Turkish. We almost could or Indian ones, the Bollywood ones. Yeah. So it's interesting how, you know, language also needs that kind of exposure, and you might start, you know, I'm sure Marjan Jan and Punejan know better teaching language that, you know, the exposure helps a lot. But yeah,
and if I may just add, I mean, there's a famous saying, probably all of you know it, that Wittgenstein said that the limits of my language are the limits of my world. So it's very interesting that language can open the door for you and could close the door on you if you're not really willing to go through these multiple doors and speak different languages. And this happens all the time. I think the diasporic communities think about it a lot, which I think makes the idea of globalization or this tribal coming together very exciting, because it would involve hearing each other's artwork and sound of the language and so on. And so it is rather sad that the universities, thinking in terms of sheer profit and the number of, enrollments and so forth, they're not paying as much attention to how important it is to keep these languages taught and alive. So let me
add also this for Professor Kar Mustafa. In Iran,
just call me Ahmed, please. Thank you.
For Ahmed Jan. In Iran, after the Islamic Republic, which was the period that I went to school, we didn't get to learn Armenian that much. We had 2 hours weekly, which was kind of extracurricular hours. We had to stay longer. And then that made us, I remember myself, my classmates, we hated Armenian because it was so difficult for us. We were not doing well in our classes. They were asking us to write essays and compositions. We couldn't do well. We had to ask one student who was, who had parents who had gone to university and university educated in Armenian language. So it was very difficult. And then in high school, I don't even remember, but I'm pretty sure that it was cut out of the entire curriculum. We didn't have Armenian at all in high school. So for me, also reading all these poems and, the works, I read like novels this thick in Armenian and tried to understand them. Also, grappling with the translation of them to make it accessible in the manuscript for others to read was a very difficult process, but it started during the pandemic, which was a good way of, also battling, the pandemic, social distancing and all of those. At least I had something challenging to work with. But I just want to say that, language and the significance of language, as Fatemeh Jan says, this door to this project was not open for me a few years ago.
Right.
If I had not, yeah.
Well,
I just wanted to say that it is one thing, obviously, among Armenians of various different language and country backgrounds to not find access to each other that easily. Another part of it is also that when you teach about, let's say, Armenians as opposed as is the case for Kurds, the reality of the, again, fissured and fragmented nature of that linguistic identity of being an Armenian or a Kurd is also covered over for, let's say, English-speaking Americans. They think when you say Armenian, they think, oh, they all understand one another. And so when you talk about the transnational Armenian diasporic community, they imagine they're totally connected and they're sort of reading each other. And so that's another difficulty in terms of teaching about these things. And that on top of the difficulties that you as a researcher and an insider have. So all these layers probably need to be made explicit in the classroom, which is so very difficult. But anyway, those were the kind of things that I was thinking about when I asked you the question. The homeland in the language is also, even in the imagination, is fragmented and fissured because there is no shared linguistic homeland. So anyway,
Yeah, so as we're getting close to the end of the time, unfortunately, first let me say, Claudia, I was absolutely delighted when I heard you a few months ago, the first time you made a presentation about Armenian. And I thought, wow, at last, now I know what happened. You got a chance to pay attention to it. I want to also welcome Professor Turaj, Mehdi Jan, Khosh Amadid, to our group, although we're close to ending today's meeting. Yeah, but now I lost the train of thought. I had a particular question for you, but you know, I guess I know what I was going to ask. I don't know how much time we have, but I have my colleague here, Dr. Musavi Marjan, who's a scholar of cinema who actually has done his work on cinema and teaches on cinema. So I wondered if she could tell us anything about the Armenian representation in Iranian cinema. I mean, are they really, do they stand out? Do people pay attention to them?
Well, thank you for asking the question. Of course, when at the beginning, when you were talking about the huge role of Armenians in development of print culture in Iran, I just wanted to say that yes, there is a huge role. I mean, we can trace the big role of Armenians in development of Western style theater, not only traditional, but also Western style theater in Iran, and performing arts are so much indebted to the role of Armenians. They had their own, you know, theater companies in the 19th century, and in translation, in acting on the stage, the first actresses are from Armenian groups. So in terms of representation of Armenian figures in Iranian cinema and also theater, this representation of the diverse ethnicities in Iran also has been very, you know, important, has become important for Iranian film directors and also theater makers. So talking about, again, the Armenian Martyrs, for instance, those who lost their life during the Iran-Iraq War, we have several films and also theatrical productions that feature the sacrifice they have done. And they have, well, many of them are featured speaking in Armenian, you know, Armenian Persian with the accent. But still, I'm very glad that we have this strong presence of, you know, and they are recognized and included in the characterization, you know, and the narrative of these performances. I mean, I can go on and on, but there is a hand raised here by Fariba, and I invite her to speak.
Okay, so thank you so much for this wonderful talk. I put this in the chat, but I'll bring it up. I work on pluralism in pre-modern Ottoman Empire, on Istanbul, Armenian, Jewish, Muslim encounters. And there's a lot of records, you know, pre-genocide, of course. And I was wondering, you know, for Iran, of course, Armenians have played such a significant role. I mean, many of them converted to Islam and, you know, served the Safavid Empire in various capacities. Are there any studies of Muslim Armenian encounters in Iran, you know, in the Pahlavi era, before that? Because I think there's just such a lacuna. I mean, you know, you talked about the memoirs of Armenians in poetry, and I wonder how far back, you know, these memoirs go back, whether we have anything in Armenian for the 19th century, for the previous era. And of course, you know, the active role of the Armenians in the Iranian constitutional revolution. That's another topic that, you know, is getting a lot of attention. Women's experiences, you know. So, you know, as a historian, I'm just curious.
Thank you, Fariba. I know Huri Berberian and Tadin Grigor are working on the constitutional revolution and Pahlavi era women's works and women's participation. So their work will be out probably at the same time when mine will come out. I've specifically focused on the past 40 years after Islamic Revolution and the Iran-Iraq War, because those two moments were turning points in the mass migrations of Armenians from Iran, as they were for Iranians generally too. So I have not done research before that, so I don't know if there are any memoirs, you know, from constitutional revolution and the Safavid era, or even Pahlavi era. I'm sure if we try to, we might find things here and there, but at least I haven't encountered that. I can say I haven't looked for them, but I haven't encountered either. Yeah, but I mean, I don't think there are specific Muslim Armenian encounter research that has been done. There are obviously references like in Zoya Pirzad's work, the marriages and intermarriages and the social interactions in the works that we have had and that I have looked at, we have those, but I don't know if there are anything before, like in Pahlavi era. Do we have similar interactions? Do we have similar, biases against intermarriages? So, yeah.
I just wanted to add that.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm writing a paper right now on the constitutional movement in Tabriz, and Tabriz was, a major center. And it's really interesting that a lot of activity was focused in the Armenian neighborhood in which I grew up. It's just really amazing how involved, the Armenian community was in the Iranian constitutional revolution. And you don't see the same thing, to some extent in the Ottoman Empire. So, and many of them came from the Caucasus. They were deeply involved.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you're beginning to kind of understand that moment in their history by digging up into these archives.
Just a very important area to cover. So hopefully there would be research coming out. And Claudia, I'm so happy you mentioned Zoya Pirzad, one of many of us, I guess, one of our most favorite writers and most beautifully writing in Persian. I don't know if she has anything in Armenian, but she certainly is a very effective and I believe one of her books is or maybe more are translated. I saw that was translated. So hard to let you go. This was an amazing presentation, wonderful. Everybody, you can tell from the conversation and the questions and all that it has engaged all of us. Thank you so much. And we look forward to more, and we certainly look forward to your book being out. And thank you all for staying for over an hour and a half with us. It's lovely to have you all here, and just say goodbye and look forward to more in the near future. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great evening.
Thank you.